постики,
О,
это единственное. И я хотел бы спросить, в туалет тоже.
Ну, на самом деле, я могу тоже.
Анастасия будет за, так сказать, штурвалом.
Василь.
Следующий проект после того, как мы закончим с Верчом. Мне кажется, у вас еще есть пару местечек, если нет, то давайте. Окей, если хотите, можете сесть на передний ряд. Сюда. Не стесняйтесь. Не знаю еще. Hi everyone, we will have 5 more minutes to let people together. If you'd like some refreshments, water, sweets, please, yes, help yourself. It's going to be a long talk, so make yourself comfortable.
Можно как бы займите
Можешь. Так, у нас в стул, давайте мы представляем. Тише, да, кажется, круг осянет, надо поставить там.
Я сам стану. Ну, как бы, если
Кто заряжает у меня телефон? Прошу.
Ты готовый?
Товарищи спикеры готовы? Okay. Right. All right. Good evening and welcome to Globus Books. I'm loving it how we started the year strong with the events and how out of all other options you've chosen to celebrate Valentine's Day here with us and show all your love for the Ukrainian poetry. How amazing are you? Thank you. A quick reminder, as always, to please make sure all of our phones were silenced. Thank you. And no, I won't stop reminding you to please like, share, and comment on our videos on YouTube. It's not about hype. This is how you can actually help authors and their books to find their audience. For those who are watching us online, please do not be shy to submit your questions. The chat is working. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions. For our audience, if you have a question or a comment, I think it is safe to say, yes, please go ahead and ask it, but let's keep it civilized. Raise your hand so we can see you and we can't call you out. Well, 2 weeks ago, we started a very tough but very necessary conversation on the poetic response of the Ukrainian authors. Come here. Sorry for the interruption. Yes, so 2 weeks ago, we started a tough but very necessary conversation on a poetic response of the Ukrainian authors on one of the most outrageous massacres in the human's history and in the history of the Ukraine, the tragedy of Babin Yar, trauma that seems to be unprocessed till this very date. And tonight we will continue to discuss and discover Ukrainian literature, focusing on contemporary Ukrainian poetry. In this regard, I'm extremely excited and humbled to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Lviv born and raised. Yes.
it will be a conversation. So the order will be.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, Vasyl.
Yeah.
Vasyl is born and raised, award-winning poet and translator who translates mostly from German and Polish. He is a curator, literary critic, and one of the editors of the online project for Story. Please welcome Vasyl. Vasyl is going to read some of his poetry and translation, as well as the most recent works. And on the behalf of our audience and myself, I'd like to thank you for finding time to make it to our store and willing to give your POVs and views on Ukrainian poetry and contemporary poetry. Thank you. Our next speaker for tonight, is the legend of Translator Society. If I may, Joanne Steinray of Russian literature, who spent some significant time living in Moscow and St. Petersburg among prolific contemporary Russian authors while mastering her translation skills. She's a translator. She's a professor of UC California in San Diego. And she's an author of her very own book on poetry for children. And together with Anastasia Osipova, she is an editor of small but important Cicada Press. Please welcome Ainsley Morse. Tonight, among other things, Ainsley will read from the book by Maria Galina, Communiqués. This is a bilingual book of poetry that Ainsley translated together with Anna Halberstadt. And this is a diary of Maria being based in Odessa within 6 first months of the war. And last but not least, our guardian angel and the person whose expertise we trust a lot, Berkeley professor, a poet, a writer, translator, and a scholar, Polina Barskova.
Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you, Globus. It was with relief that I found out this morning that today is not only Valentine's Day. It's not that I have anything against Valentine, but also it's a day of giving books, of book giving, книгодарение. And I decided that it's absolutely appropriate that we're in Globus and we, of course, will give each other books today, just taking them from shelves, giving them to each other. 2 weeks ago, we started the series, as Anastasia said. We discussed 2 books by Kianovsky and by Ostap, and we're continuing our conversations. I think I like this idea that we're talking about fata libelli, about fates of books, судьбы книг, книжечек, and our relationships with books. I was pleasantly surprised to understand that we have today 2 important people in the city who make books of Ukrainian poetry, among the other things. Our days are tough and weird in various ways, and obviously this is the undertone of our conversation. But the tougher the days, the darker the days, the stranger the days, still, it even wants us to make books more. And this will be one of our questions today. What kind of books are born of this kind of times? Какие книжечки начинаются и рождаются временами такого сорта? The genre of tonight's meeting will be беседы. I will talk first to Ainsley and then to Vasyl about their relationships with books that they make and they send into the world, and about Ukrainian poetry's existence in the world today. Last time was mostly about yesterday that cannot end. Today will be about presentness, the moment of the now. So let's start. The language of our habitat is English for a number of reasons, but if you want to ask your questions in Ukrainian and in Russian, you're absolutely welcome. Poetry will sound in Russian and in Ukrainian. Let's see how it goes. Ainsley, you are talking today about this handsome, tiny book. Communiqués. Here it is. This is one of my very favorite questions in the world. Как случилась эта книжечка? How did it come into being?
It's a question I'm delighted to answer. So with Maria Galina, I had known Maria Galina for a long time. She and her husband Arkady Shtipol, who sadly died earlier, or I guess in the fall, were mainstays of almost all the poetry readings I ever went to in Moscow, which is where they lived for a long time. But they both grew up in Ukraine. And Maria Galina moved to Moscow as a young woman right when the Soviet Union was falling apart, and was working for a long time at Novy Mir, the famous literary journal. And they left Moscow in mid-February 2022 for Odessa, where Arkady Shtipol was from and where Maria had spent a lot of time in her youth. And as Maria said later, I work on science fiction. We build models of the future. I knew what was going to happen, and I wanted to be on the right side of the border when it happened. So they got to Odessa maybe a week before the invasion, and she has been there ever since. So I had known her casually in this way through the poetry scene. And then we started to work together more closely when I was asked to translate some of her work for one of these poetry. Was it even your idea, or was it Kevin? Was it you? Something? A poetry, a kind of large-scale poetry translation endeavor. This was during the pandemic, so I translated a few of her poems, and it was a really incredible experience. And we remained in touch. And then from Odessa, when I was checking in with her in the first weeks after the invasion, together with my co-translator, Anna Halberstadt, we started talking about doing a book. And Maria said, well, I just finished the book, actually, but I'm definitely not publishing it in Russia anymore. So let's do that book. So the title of her book was going to be Number 7, as her 7th book of poems. And we ultimately decided to change the title. The English title is Communiqués. I think it still says Number 7 when you open it, like on the inside. Yeah, the facing page has the original title she had in mind. The book is called Communiqués after, but for two reasons. First, the cycle that opens the book is a cycle of Communiqués, reляции. So a kind of military term. And this is a cycle, I'll read a poem from in a minute, that draws on reports of travels in Ukraine from a well-known French explorer in the 17th century, Guillaume de Beauplan. And so Maria works with these kind of somewhat fantastical sounding reports about travels around Ukraine, and builds poems out of them. The other reason the book is called Communiqués is that in the second part of it, we have translated a bunch of the diary entries that Maria Galina started to write, beginning from, I think it starts like the day before the Russian invasion. She is still writing this diary now, almost exactly 3 years later. She does a post every day in Facebook. And one of the things, so this is an important document in the way that war diaries always are, but it is also a fascinating story about language, because as we give maybe the first 6 months, excerpts from the first 6 months of these diaries from February till about June, so not even 6, like 4 or 5. And gradually, they start off in Russian and they gradually add more and more Ukrainian. And by June of 2022, she is writing almost completely in Ukrainian. And Maria Galina was born in, I should know this, she's about my mother's age. She is not a young person. And so I found really interesting and powerful to see that somebody who has been living in a Russian language environment for a very long time, nevertheless, feels a very strong need to switch in this way. So that is also a kind of communique, in a more dramatically military sense. So that's the story basically of how this book came to be.
So since, as it was already mentioned, you're one of our generations, though I'm almost your mother's age, translators extraordinaire. You translate a lot. With each project and each poet, obviously you form its unique relationship. Why this world was interesting for you? Galina's world.
The world of
this
Galina?
book, yeah.
I think that almost all of my translation projects happen because of some kind of human connection. And when the bombings began in Ukraine, I had been discussing drafts of a translation with her a few days prior to that. She was certainly one of the first people I thought of when I was sitting there in horror, like everybody here surely was, watching this happen. And there was really nothing I could do except talk to her about books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what you said in your opening remarks, that the stranger and more terrible things get in a way that can seem kind of paradoxical. We grab for what we know, I think.
I also would like to add about the case of this particular poet. I teach her in my classes of contemporary literature. She is one of the most original writers of sci-fi today. The sci-fi that is so incredibly trivial and realistic, and I would say beautifully boring, then you get very comfortable in it, and then monstrous things begin stirring. And I think she was one of the absolutely favorite authors for my class in this way. And then I was really impressed to see that she took this, technique of philosophy, I'm not sure what is better here, to how she makes poetry today. This cycle, Reляции, is one of the most serious events for me. Recent poetry. Again, she takes the form of travelogue. And it's devilishly, disgustingly difficult for me to teach contemporary literature, I have to say. At first I was excited by it, now I'm almost repulsed by the project. It's so difficult, but you learn something. It's so difficult because you're not sure whom to teach. You are not sure about the selection. Then you end up teaching your friends and your rivals, which is also a very strange pleasure. But teaching this class recently, I understood that travelogue is the main form of the day. People use travel writing for very different purposes. It's just the form, the cookie cutter, that becomes filled with various kinds of desires, anxieties, and whatnot. So what Galina does, she takes the travelogue from many centuries ago, путешественник в прошлом, and you read it. It obviously plays with the genre of describing the exotic lands. The French travel is writing, right? And then again, something strange begins. And then you understand eventually, gradually, that this strangeness is what happened basically starting from now many years ago. No.
Should I read one?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had one picked out.
Let's read, and please just enter this world with us. More and more book lovers.
I'll just add, so I thought I would read one of these Communiqués, one of these Relații, number 2. But I forgot to mention when describing it before that the way Maria organized the cycle, the poems with this title that draw on this travelogue are they alternate with other poems that are more obviously, I guess you could say, her original poems. So I'm going to read one of the Relații and one of the poem that immediately comes after. Okay. So we'll read in English and in Russian. So communique number 2. They post guards on hilltops. At the sight of the enemy, the guards let out a special signal. The rest, the ones working in the fields at that time, toss aside the heads of wheat already collected, rush to hide in the hideaways set up for that purpose. This vigilance of theirs deserves the highest praise, just as the arrangement of their dwellings, their love for children, and innate cleanliness. Waste sites are always set up as far as possible from food storage and sleeping areas. These animals are friendly and harmless, similar to our marmots, but bigger. Their upper jaw holds 2 enormous teeth sticking out. They collect dry leaves and grasses for the winter in an amusing way. The one collecting lies on its back and holds the bunch in its paws, while 2 others drag it by its short tail to the burrow. One time I dug up one of their dwellings out of curiosity. It was amusing to watch them fussing about, running around, grabbing their young and supplies, family jewels, books, photographs, and documents. I even brought one of them home with me. It became attached to me no less than my dog.
Реляция номер 2. Они выставляют стражу на верхушке холма при виде неприятеля. Часовые спускают особый сигнал. Остальные, те, кто в это время трудится в поле, бросают уже собранные колосья, торопятся скрыться в специально оборудованных укрытиях. Это их бдительность достойна самой высокой оценки, равно как устройство их жилищ, чадолюбие и врожденная чистоплотность. Отхожее место они всегда устраивают как можно дальше от кладовых и спален. Зверьки эти дружелюбные и безобидные, похожи на наших сурков, но крупнее. Из верхней челюсти торчат 2 огромных зуба. Они собирают на зиму сухие листья и травы забавным способом. Сборщик ложится на спину и держит охапку в лапах, тогда как 2 других тащат его за короткий хвостик к норе. Я как-то из любопытства раскопал их жилище. Забавно было смотреть, как они суетились, как бегали, хватали детенышей и припасы, фамильные драгоценности, книги, фотографии, документы. Я даже держал одного такого в доме. Этот привязался ко мне не хуже моей собаки.
And the poem that follows this in the cycle. No train station here, the old man said. But I remember very well that it was here. I remember the square in front of the station, the sunflower seed sellers, and apple sellers. They sold apples by the bucket. These yellow apples, bruised all over. I suppose they were windfall. No one would buy them, but the sellers sat there all the same. Perhaps, the old man said, you imagined it. Déjà vu. What, even the apples? Apples are what people tend to imagine most of all. But somehow, she objected, somehow I've found myself here. There's a certain chance that you've always lived here, the old man said. There still has to be a station. Every city has to have a place you can leave from, leave forever. Otherwise, the city's no good at all. No train station here. Perhaps there was one once, a very long time ago. There was an airport before, too. What? She asks. No one here can leave? If you like, I can row you across in my boat, the old man offered. No, thank you, she said. Thank you very much. No need. Then move along out of here, the old man said. This place gets a lot of crossfire.
Здесь нет вокзала, сказал старик. Но я точно помню, что был. Я помню вокзальную площадь, торговок семечками и яблоками. Яблоки продавали ведрами. Желтые такие яблоки с битыми боками. Я полагаю, это падалица. Их никто не брал, но торговки все равно сидели. Возможно, сказал старик, вам показалось. Ложная память. Что и яблоки? Яблоки – то, что склонно казаться людям в первую очередь. Но как-то, возразила она, как-то же я сюда попала. Есть некоторый шанс, что вы жили здесь всегда, сказал старик. Все равно должен быть вокзал. В каждом городе должно быть место, откуда можно уехать. Совсем уехать. Иначе этот город никуда не годится. Здесь нет вокзала. Возможно, когда-то был, очень давно. Когда-то и аэропорт был. Что, спросила она, отсюда нельзя уехать? Если хотите, я могу перевезти вас на лодке, предложил старик. Нет, спасибо, сказала она. Спасибо большое. Не надо. Тогда отойдите отсюда, сказал старик. Это место хорошо простреливается. One more question before you read more. So I kind of promised that conversation today is about books of today. this is an unusual book in a way that it connects poetry with diary, almost with news. And it was your collective decision to create this connection. Could you talk to this?
It's really, it was a big decision, but it was taken without a lot of conversation. So as I mentioned, this was a whole book. We did add a couple of poems at the end. Some of them were poems I had translated before, but mostly it's just this book that she had completed right before the invasion. But I think because both Anna and I, and probably hundreds of other people we know, were really waiting for these daily updates from Odessa that Masha began to post. At first in this kind of spontaneous way, and then I think it became clear to her that a lot of people were really waiting to hear, Доброго ранку or Не дуже доброго ранку, right? That it became a project within the first couple of months. So something that began spontaneously. I mean, and that began, I think, initially as kind of a somewhat despairing cry in the direction of Russia in terms of who her circle of interlocutors had been, but then grew to contain a very international group and a lot of people in Ukraine. So by the time we were finishing the manuscript, it seemed absolutely appropriate and necessary to include these kinds of communiqués as well. And of course, I mean, it's definitely a book of contemporary poetry because it was completed by a living contemporary poet. But I think you're right that this also turns it into even more of a document of its time.
It's great because this conversation, what is a book of poetry for our times, right? Last time we spoke about an anthology that Ostap put together from 1941 to very recent works, and now it's a book of poems that also are turning into diary entries, basically. So the conversation about temporality of poetry is becoming also curious and curiouser. Would you read some of it?
So a couple of other poems that I wanted to read this evening are from a new book that Maria Galina just put out in the fall. So like many people, Maria felt that she could not write poems for a long time after the invasion began. And then she said in fits and starts, she began once again, after more than a year, to write poems, not just diary entries. And when she had completed something that seemed like a book, she sat on it even longer because she didn't know how she felt about publishing a book of poems in Russian. She said that even though she switched to using Ukrainian in her daily affairs and communications, she could not sit down and write a poem in Ukrainian. That wasn't happening for her. And so what she ended up doing is she self-translated the entire book. So the book is called Nineveh, which I, for some reason, cannot remember how to say in English. Like, I don't know where the stress is. It's the biblical city. Is anybody?
Nineveh.
Nineveh? Nineveh. Okay, Nineveh. And she published the book simultaneously with a small press in Dnipro, in her Ukrainian self-translation, and also with the new emigre press, Freedom Letters, in Russian. I think it was timed that they came out basically simultaneously. So actually, in just next weekend, we'll have this Slavic Studies Conference at Seal, and we will be working on some of the poems from this book, working with both the Ukrainian and the Russian, because since it is a self-translation, it is not exactly the same. I mean, it's never exactly the same. It wouldn't be exactly the same if it were somebody else's translation either, but there are, I would say, more intentional divergences. That happened, she tells me, happened quite spontaneously through the process of self-translation. So I hear that this book can probably be ordered.
Yep. If I mean the Russian version, but I'm pretty sure we can do the Ukrainian language as well. It's gonna a little bit longer to deliver, but yeah, everything is possible in Globus.
So all of your book needs here at Globus. But I have just, so we're going to have like a translation workshop around this book in another week. And I have translated a couple of just drafts. And I thought I would read a few of them. Okay. I have to decide. Okay, I'm going to start with this one. And unfortunately, I didn't print out, or oh no, I did print out the Russian, so you can read it. Yeah, okay. For this one at least. I will never see again the triple gates of great Nineveh, her sapphire paving stones, her laser mirrors, her winged bulls hanging gardens, skyscrapers, towers glazed the color of clotted blood, her platform for public executions, golden flags, crenellated mausoleum, her painted courtesans, beef-faced guards, gleaming limousines, fat-bellied dirigibles, streets paved in red, gold, and hematite, multicolored musical fountains, her underground firmament with plump, rosy clouds, her ziggurats, her poverty and luxury, her infirmity, her mokos, I will never see again, except a flame, flickering in the burning air, writhing in the blaze of red, black, gold, incinerating fires of the Lord's wrath. Which?
Я больше никогда не увижу тройных ворот Ниневии Великой, ее лазурных плит, ее лазерных зеркал, ее крылатых быков, висячих садов, небоскребов, глазурных башен цвета спекшейся крови, помоста для публичных казней, золотых знамен, зубчатого мавзолея, ее расписных блудниц, мордатых стражников, сверкающих лимузинов, дирижаблей пузатых, улиц мощеных червоным золотом и гематитом цвета музыкальных фонтанов, небес ее подземных с пухлыми розовыми облаками, ее зиккуратов, ее нищеты и роскоши, ее немощи, ее мокоши я никогда не увижу, разве что пылающий, дрожащий, в горячем воздухе, корчащийся в огне, червонном, черном, золотом, испепеляющем огне гнева Господня.
This is a short poem that actually recently got published in the New York Review of Books. Okay. At the checkpoint during the search, they confiscated an old family photograph, a power bank, toner, concealer, lip gloss, mascara, a block of Marlboros, a ring with a seal, her beryl diadem, her blessed symbols of sovereignty and judgment, They groped around in her underpants and bra, allegedly looking for hidden cash. What are you doing? What? Calm down, they said. Dinana. The laws of the underworld are harsh. Or whatever your name is, Oksana. Listen up. Keep your mouth shut during the sacred rituals. Her whole Viber chat history with her husband and daughter, she knew to erase ahead of time. I don't have the Russian for that, or the Ukrainian. The last one that I want to read from this new collection As long as she's alive, the city is still there. The market opens its stalls every morning. The cosmetics shop on the corner lays out its temptations. The lilacs by the green fence bloom and fade. It smells of bread, and fat Auntie Nadia takes her grandson to kindergarten by the same route every day. Every morning, squeezing eyes shut, not lifting her head from the pillow, she goes out for a morning stroll. Doors open, her friends and acquaintances wave from their windows, the lilacs by the green fence bloom and fade. Come, they say to her, we rebuilt everything. Your city's even better than it was before. It's just that where the lilacs used to bloom, now there's honeysuckle and viburnum. The market's rebuilt, there are new modern kiosks, the triumph of technology, and they reconstructed the Lyceum using pre-war photographs. What about Auntie Nadia? Oh, Auntie Nadia bought that house on the corner. She came back from Great Britain. Guess what? Her daughter married an oligarch there. Plus, he's an English lord, owner of an ancestral castle. What he saw in her, who knows? She has a kid, too. Yes, yes, she says. And what about the little dog? You know, the one that had those funny multicolored ears. The one that used to bark at me from behind the fence, standing up on its hind legs. Where's the dog? Well, they say, come on now. For heaven's sake, don't be a child. That dog would have died anyway, if not from a heart attack, then from the shards of the exploded window of the cosmetics shop, or a kick from a runty little occupier, just from old age. The dog, I'm telling you, the dog would have died anyway, just from old age. Dogs aren't capable of living that long in any case.
Maria Galina writes amazing poetry about animals. One of those contemporary poets who really can do it. And the last letter that I received from her, I managed to lock my cat for a day. And when I learned about this, I was watching Monte Cristo, The Count of Monte Cristo, and I wrote about it on Facebook. And Maria Galina wrote, that's a perfect plot for my poem. A cat that is Count Monte Cristo. So, speaking of being locked out and in my pedagogical practice, I always prefer to make things clear. We're talking about Ukrainian poetry very far from where it's supposed to live. But now, as it happens to poetries, Ukrainian poetry lives in many places. It lives where its poets live. Vasyl, so Ukrainian poetry living outside of Ukraine, according to you, what is it doing to you today? How are you doing it today?
I'm doing the poetry. I'm making the poetry. Yeah, that's the question that I have to answer for myself. Like almost like any time I would just like try to reach out to the publisher, to the magazine, or to the reader, or I just like stay silent and I don't talk, or then I kind of like don't have any identity, or I try to seek for some other identity. And yeah, this is still like some work in progress. So I don't know how it will end or what this will be my like kind of like place of living in 2 years and 1 year, so we'll for sure come back to Warsaw, where we were displaced from Kiev, and it was like immediately like before the war started, probably like 1 month, and it seems like too long to wait for the beginning of the war, but since then we were staying in Poland, and me and my family were visiting the relatives here in the United States. So, but obviously my kind of like mentality is still like stuck in Lviv somewhere, like between the old Rynok Square, or like at the university, of course, too, or in Kiev, like in the later period of time when I was like more starting to write poetry. So that the time that I'm kind of still referred to all the time since I left Ukraine, and there was like no continuation of this like part of me in Ukraine anymore. So then obviously there are like many algorithms that I kind of like think about, and they get really confused by some kind of like travels that I take, do, or like it's like the poetry is still like very much behind what is like happening in my life. Poetry doesn't catch up with me right now.
So the internet journal, which recently published an interview with Ainsley, is called «Вне себя», outside of itself. Слова вне себя. And we all are trying to come up with some words that would express this outsidedness. I think obviously one of the productive ways to think about it is actually the way of think about it as translation. Words outside of themselves. So Ainsley said that many of her translation projects are born of conversations, friendships, animosities, schmoozing, reading at night next to your cat, revenge, jealousy. But Ainsley translates people who are still with us, even if they're rather far away. You translate the great ghosts. How do you choose now whom to translate? And whom do you translate?
Right. It's it complicated question, but like I would if I would have like more time, I would translate more, but even like just to choose the correct like poems to translate is sometimes the thinking about the audience, and and like also how you would rather translate the full collection of the poetry than like few poems, but then like you don't have time, like time only like for 8 poems of like neoclassicists, for example, and then for example, my recent translation of Kola Zero into German.
Zero.
So it was discovery for me that he was using kind of like very easy structures to translate into German language because like a philosophical language, and he is like a translator from Latin and Old Greek into Ukraine. So he was writing all like in some like clear metaphors and like more like classical terms, which was like very easy to translate into German. But yeah, I was working also as a native speaker of German language. To just make it all in appropriate way. But also, recently I was translating also from Russian, like some Kafkaesque group of poets or Bita into Ukrainian language, and it was an experiment in Ukrainian language because it only basically to translate from Russian for Ukrainians. But yeah, and then like get financed by the European Union just to translate between these both languages of like outside of the European Union, basically to cultures. So it was interesting to me because it was kind of like a simple Russian, like almost like a slang language, which is like very often used in Ukraine, but we don't have that language in the literature like in Ukrainian so often. So it's kind of like or an invented language, or in some like maybe like Western Galician cities, there is some like kind of like I know it for sure, but like it's not really like in the dictionaries in the literature. It was not yet. So and it was just the kind of like reverse track to translate into Ukrainian back like this like slang and like very simple poetry of Mita. So it's, Hanin and so on. And then Hanin like is influenced by, for example, by Maldestam a little bit, and it's also like kind of like some simplification or a clear metaphor or something like that. It can be all like connected to like intertextual text like through some like intertextual like dialogue, I would say. And but what is like Ukrainian literature, and first of all like Western Ukrainian literature, and like so-called like postmodern literature there that like was the so-called like Stanislavski phenomenon. It was all very like experimental, and I would say in the term that they were not really like but not conceptually experimental. It wasn't following like maybe very strict like genres and stylistic norms, or so it was something like like revolutionary or very up to date then. And it was also like environment where I was growing up like an author, but I wasn't writing then. And Ostapkin also, he translates both from Ukrainian contemporary literature. He knows this like context very well too. So that's where we grew up basically. So
Ainsley designated for us, I'm afraid rightfully, Maria Galina's way away from the Nineveh, from the realm of Russianness. One of the most exciting things for me when I'm thinking and studying humbly life of Ukrainian poetry today is its connections with other cultures and poetries. For example, in Europe, for example, with German poetry and Polish poetry. Within these cultures, who are your favorites? Who are the ghosts with whom you like to work?
The question of this spirit of the ghost. I started just to translate recently. Except of Kafka. Kafka is like my main. But he has ghosted himself by his writings, so that's why we like Kafka probably now. But obviously, living poets obviously like are the most interesting to me anyway. But and yeah, German literature is still, I would say, not very much connected to Ukrainian literature. Yeah, there are not so many influences. There were like Ukrainian authors who would translate Rilke, for example, Maria Rilke. Everyone would, like from the classics, like Tusten later on, would translate Rilke, and also then Celan at some point, Paltzian. But that was also like through the connection to Ukraine. So Celan, obviously, and then also Rilke was traveling even like to Kaniv, and he had a copy of the Kobzar in Russian translation, and he was trying to live in Russian. And yeah, and it had a big influence on Russian, on German literature, because that's how they kind of like view right now Ukraine is like a kind of like a country of mysticism, and like something was like Slavic. It's not German, but it's not like so rationally like understandable. So that's kind of like the mystic of the steppe, of the Cossacks too, maybe a little bit, but more steppe, and then yeah, the churches, the religious, the almost like obscurantism kind of like in Ukraine, and in this like forms of Rilke, like the Stundenbuch and so on and so on. So yeah, but Polish literature is changing so much and developing. So they had like this totally postmodern Herbert, who was like just writing how he liked it and so on. And then like the next generations who were really much like rooted into the Western world, and like Zagajewski, who would be connected to Lviv and Ukraine too, and the same like Herbert. So, but they would just as to me, they would be like writing more for in like Western audience, not caring so much about the Polish audience anymore, and especially Zagajewski, he would write just more like cosmopolitan poetry that would be easy to translate, and that's what in Polish literature is happening right now. But Ukraine is right now, I guess, opening to the like very broad audience, and that's why they kind of like almost like it's like the poetry of the scream of the like this like expressionist, like, and all what they see, what they experience is like this like very modernist poetry that's like expressionist style. But yeah, I don't read so much right now because it's not possible. But maybe also at some point I try to just have my own view on the events, but I'm also not there, and the articles or the news that I read from the newspapers, kind of like have an impact on me too. So that's not easy for me, kind of like to reconnect with the audience who are the native speakers, and kind of like I don't know, it's still very developing culture, book market, publishing, publishing sphere. So it's something what is like really dynamic right now in Ukraine. The literature there.
Would you read for us?
Yes, thank you. Of course, that's. Let me. Yeah, right now there are like several book collections that I wrote, and some of them are right now published only online, and the English one is like kind of like chapbook translated by Ostapkin and Eli Kinzela, so it's only like available online. There are some chapbooks. They publish. They are like a Google Doc on the Google disk, online disk. So and something of the earlier poetry I just co-translate with some different translators. So recently I was working with Cecilia Woloch, who has like Ukrainian and some Roma roots. And she's spending like half a year, usually like in somewhere next to Ukrainian border in Poland. exploring their like some of the ancestors, their stories. Okay, I'll read probably something from something in the time of the frame of the like Kiev text and like European text when I was like traveling in Norse countries in the north. And this one is, for example, probably that's the kind of like a surreal poem about how hear the bell in Sweden, but it tells the story about the Russian church, or actually in Western Ukraine it would be like the Polish Kościół, Polish church would also be like occupied by some Western Ukraine religious people. So that. When bells are ringing, counting time, this is not Nikkei or Moscow Orthodox Patriarchy, but they are ringing, and isn't this annoying you? So what then does an abandoned church mean where collective farm storage was? A TV presenter is speaking in Polish out loud, a translation of the Animal Planet, or some other educational program where you romantically time travel. Magazines The Science and Life, Junior Technician, are children's utopias from an older generation, and you have read in them about dinosaurs. One needs to collect everything, bones and skeletons, learn how to dig up the tracks, and to be silent like the ruins of a church, to be able to hear / read you. So those time tracks.
Translation from Ukrainian.
Yes, that's right.
Can you read the Ukrainian?
Not this poem, probably. No, I don't have it. Like, I'll look up. Okay, I'll read another poem in Ukrainian. Printing everything else. Yeah. Треки часу. Коли пробивають дзвони, відраховуй час, це не Ніккей і не московський патріархат, але вони дзвонять, тебе дратують. Чим тоді є церква закинута, де був колгоспний склад? Диктор по-польськи проговорює переклад планети тварин або якоїсь такої едукаційної програми, де романтично подорожуєш у часі. Журнали «Наука і життя», «Юний технік», «Наука і жизнь», «Юний технік», дитячі утопії старшого покоління. І ти читав у них про динозаврів. Треба все колекціонувати, кістки і скелети, навчитися копати, викопувати треки, і як руїни церков мовчати, щоб тебе без поспіху чути, читати. Yeah. It's one. Another country. In my head, I have made a place for 2 Americas. I have found time for 2 dinners in a bar at the side of the highway. You know, when nobody is on the road and you need to make an appointment over the phone, when you are mixing up places and words. There is a jukebox. Our group has come here to check out the place and play a game. Locals come to this bar along with souls like us, writers from all over the world, every night. A hole in the wall next to the highway. Yet look at how many prototypical bars appear in the movies. Dollars are more artificial than any other currency. I would better spend them here in this country. In another country, they aren't spent on a game of pool or on a jukebox or whatever. Here in this bar, the coins are consumed like time by a plastic riffle at a shooting arcade. It was translated by me and Jessica Zychowicz, my spouse. So, and then Insha Kraina. So the title was added later a little bit, but this is the title of one of my poetry collections too. У своїй голові я зробив місце для 2 Америк, знайшов час для 2 вечер, з баром на узбіччі дороги. Знаєте, коли нікого пізно на дорозі і треба домовлятися по телефону, коли плутаєш місця та слова, музичний автомат, пізній візит компанії, що загинула для гри, Сюди приїздили місцеві, навіть такі, як ми, з цілого світу, кожен вечір. Дорога місцевого значення, але як багато прототипів у кіно. Долари штучніші за всі гроші. Слід залишити у цій країні. Інші вони не для гри в снукер, музичний автомат, whatever. Монети для пластикового ствола. Ну, деякі тексти власне писалися якось так як сюрреалістично, so they were written like a surreal like stream of consciousness, but but until I kind of like have the maybe one particular interpretation of it, I can reread it later and have some like meaning. Right now with the like shipments of weapons to Ukraine, or it could be like something like about the carrier of the weapons in weapons carrier, or like in the US of how it's like legislated here, and what does it like leads to. So, I have some few forms without translation and then a few translations too. So you're good on time. Yes, so it was more announced that I will read from the Feast After Debauchery or Holiday After Debauchery. It was like my first poetry collection, but I didn't got many translations yet of this book. From this book, so yeah, it's still more like in process, and I'm editing some of the translations. But there was a book published of Czech book, the Maidan After Hours, and then so probably I'll read one of the poems from that book, and then the translators Stad Kim and Ali Kinsella. So I'm glad they were undertaking this like project. Then Islands of Credibility. Out of all teachers, this one was noticed the least. There was the idea of falling in love with geography, since how can you fall in love with language or literature? Besides, you have got to deal with the teachers, a city, a landscape, or some island, regardless of geological period, is another thing. Nations usually learn from others' mistakes in other countries. Where there was war, peace will reign. Where you need knowledge, there will be a teacher. When you are asked not to speak, it means what you said was correct. Will they yet bomb the islands of credibility with atomic warheads? This is how the information war breaks out. If you suffer from paranoia, the enemies have won. Do you hear the song that follows you from the speakers as you move from one cafe to another on your way? So it was written after already the war started in Kiev. But not in Kiev yet, but it was started like, so it was like January 2015. So it was like, all this like also book is about this like more immediate reaction of the, I don't know, like the Maidan events and the war that went on, like started just after the Maidan. I mean, there was like already then. The concern for everyone.
I have a little comment. When we're speaking about Galina's book and her communications, this book by Vasyl also reminds me a little bit of Communications, because he has lots of tiny poetries that report from Maidan. And for those who are very interested but haven't been there, like me, for example, I think it's a valuable like resource and quite beautiful as well.
Yeah, it's free online. I mean, it's open source. So the one poem which is also connected to the Nordic country. I won't read it right now. Yeah, some of the travels kind of inspire me to. I mean, mostly, but also like right now staying in Poland is not so inspiring to me, but we'll see. So I was starting to translate Miloš, who was like more in that areas here, and how he would think about him, like reading to some like his like students maybe, or like to some like sea lions the poetry in San Francisco, because he was not really like really connected to his readers, and then like, he would be proud he would know Russian, and he would have to compete like with some Chinese poets, and yeah, so it's like the experience that we can learn from them. So 2, 3, so maybe. Yes, I made the translation by Cecilia Volov. One translation by Cecilia. Yeah, this is the writer's blog. Writer's blog form called. Then with other translations. Yeah, my book is in Polish right now. The most easy to find, but yeah, it's easy to find. Okay, then maybe I'll read first like some recent poem in Ukrainian, and then I'll find the translation. So. Yeah, this is like what's it's connected to the state of California, but it's different than here because it's like more southern there, and it was written last year in January. Zapóźniła osень. One of my book collection is called like Recorded Scent Summer. It's like Indian summer in Swedish, and yeah, they almost don't have the summer there. They have some like late summer, which is like already August. It's already like late summer there and beginning of the autumn. So yeah, if you travel between like climate zones, you think like about how it changes, or what do you experience like two winters in a row, then no winter, the one winter mist, and then like many autumns. Зекономити час для літа, залатвити справи, дуже терміново, ще перед спекою або в спеку. Прискіпливість до деталей, наче роздратування через надмірне світло сонця, перфекціонізм, постійність, наче минущість буття, встигнути перед полуднем, повернутись до нормальності, світло для кіно, і скільки кольорів, які давніше не бачив. У 5-й раз тут уже і в 2-й або в 3-й раз той самий місяць. Циклічність природи майже ідентична через таку погоду. Новини з малої батьківщини зазвичай про сніг, і як з іншого паралельного або міфологічного чи пізнішого середньовічного світу. Багато слідів тут, від майже незмінної погоди. Запитуєш себе, що тут ще потрібно зробити, чому присвятити увагу. Ukrainian too. For example, I was starting to write about birds. Right now we are staying with some friends who are like bird watcher, and they kind of like know everything about birds, and they're kind of like even following their roots into the Latin America and like taking pictures of them there, going there. But and if I went like to some like zoos here or something, then I would also cover like storks, which are like very typical for Ukrainian, and they are going to Africa like every winter. So, but yeah, right now it's not really probably what I would do. But like when I have been in Canada, also in Edmonton, which is like very cold place, there were like some Ulsters, and then some people from Germany would say, "Yeah, that's what we have here too." So it's like just boring. But I was observing them in that like minus 40 degrees, so it's like it's in Fahrenheit. And then and it was always spring, but it was like warmer. Soroka в Canada. So it's like kind of like very like pigeons in Europe. So you would not write maybe poems about pigeons in Europe. They are everywhere, like where tourists are and so on. So like to me, like Ulster is like that right now in Canada. But I would say what else? Some other birds. There was a stork there. So now in Ukrainian, Soroka в Канаді. Ми будуємо гнізда на деревах, зграє сорок, невеличка група і поодинокі пари скрекочуть. Внизу снігова глазурь, яка повільно тане та замерзає. Робітники в жилетках і фірмових джинсах. На обідній перерві на місці, не на виніс замовляють. Під кінець пандемії весною дім на дереві добудовують. Будівельна пташина техніка житла і ніяких шкідливих звичок. Самотужки збираються гілки, не крадуть, що блистить. Метал або і навіть не віддають своє пташеня. Кладуть яйця після готової покрівлі у парку. Скрекіт попереджає про гостей. Народні прикмети неточні. Якщо вороноподібні не навчають своєму говору і гніздобудуванню прибульців, канадський скрекіт їм новина. Наче поржавілий насос або сигналізація, наче заклик до ружжя, вистріли заради тиші дому, двора або ганку. So it was written right after the pandemic, like 21. So that's where I was habited.
Хочешь еще одну поставить?
Yeah, it's only reading, then maybe one of those English translations to the more people. So yeah, on the way here, we were going like through Mojave Desert. So it was a really interesting experience, and I had like some other poem of Mojave Desert there. But yeah, it's not translated yet. So, but it was just like mist turn, and we got like drive for 2 hours in the desert, and there were like tumble like weeds rolling. It was very windy. We were like really in the wild west.
Tumbleweed.
Yes.
There's a very small population of native Californian magpies here, somewhere in the South California. There are no magpies in America, but that small population.
Okay, good. Yeah, Cecilia Woloch was concentrating on these poems. What was that?
Замечательно. Это была сноска про сорок.
Сорок. Да, это не Elster is like in probably in German, right? Mixing some of the words from German language to English. So yeah, that's right. That's important. And also another title that is from the title of the chapbook, but I had to kind of like use it at the poem because one of the poems it would be published, so it should be connected to the collection of poetry. So Ukraine's summer, which means like Ukrainian Indian summer. I have already been a month in Ukraine, and now I'm going by train to Lviv. Air temperature outside is 68 Fahrenheit. It's dusk. I have passed into safe hands the packed up archive, the collection of envelopes from writers recycled for sending books to me, drafts and numerous printouts of the same text for reading aloud. From now on, ephemeral literature is not my path. I can manage without the publishing house and the cold bloodiness of the paper and someone's read books of endangered species, fairy tales for no one because published for secret societies, sunset on the horizon, a mysterious landscape and the west of Europe just behind the river's Bruges, the border that has cost Poland so much. Is someone approaching me to ask if I'm writing poems in the Intercity Express? The books I have read need to be returned. In the mirroring image of the window, the light of knowledge shines. Do no harm, but books are fodder only for the few. My scorn of money has not been detected by anyone yet. My recorded voice has been published on the internet and on cassette. And earlier than that, I have published a checkbook by myself. Translated by me and Cecilia Woloch. With a very
So, while you are thinking about your questions, and I think it's totally exciting and cool to ask practitioners, makers, how they make things. Actually, they never know how they make things because things, it's just the process. You do it. But nevertheless, there are some benefits of speaking to them. I feel like I'm speaking to the spies sometimes. For example, when I meet a poet, I always ask, in your poetry, who are your favorite people? And it's astonishing that usually answers differ. And every time you receive a completely new map of poetry and you think, do these people connect at all? And it's so much. Let's play a game. So I am a tiny little green alien. I arrive to your desk at 4 a.m. and I ask you, give me your Ukrainian poetry. Several names, please.
My answer would not change, like, since I was answering like I was answering this question like 15 years ago. So
Fine.
change.
I just met you,
Yeah.
so
Good.
I would take any answer.
But like the point is like what was translated. So like for example, the Flying Head by Victor Neborak was translated, and it's like there was somewhere published in Philadelphia or so, I guess. So yeah, some other things would not be translated yet, were published like
Try me.
and then there
But
are some
also we have heard.
yes.
Maybe
Yeah,
some-
actually, I wanted to ask earlier
Fine.
a similar question without even having to wear my alien costume. In the fall at San Diego, we had this wonderful series of Ukrainian poets coming to read their work, and everyone who came, I said, practical question. It's but also with a sort of selfish angle, right? Not selfish for me for once. Usually I'm selfish. Who needs to be translated into English from Ukrainian? And we were asking about poets in particular, and selfish because if you're a poet, you can be read in a vacuum, right? And a lot of Ukrainian poets whose work is being translated into English are being read in a vacuum, or they're being read in a very small space that is occupied only by other contemporary poets who are writing about the war. So if you want to be read in a kind of a bigger room with more friends, right? So that was a question that we were asking people in the fall, and I would love to hear your answer. Like, who would it, if we are reading your work and admiring it, who might allow us, whose other work might allow us to admire it?
The contemporary one.
Not
at all.
Ukrainian, but yeah, this is
All
like
time.
a very
think. Take a moment. It's a response. Like our friend and I don't know, yet another guardian angel, Eugene Ostashevsky, walks around screaming that everything will be resolved
Once we translate
if only
Skovoroda.
we'd all translate and read Skovoroda urgently. So this is Ostashevsky point of view.
That's also was the question when I was like teaching a course at the University of Michigan. So I had to like make the trajectory where what is like in translation already at least, like, and then I wasn't like translating anything because I would not have time, but like I would translate something to the Polish because they still like have like recently published like it's Kochubay, for example, is like very unique poet for some like community in Lviv, and then like for many more poets, but he's still like not very well known abroad or even like in Ukraine. But also like I think like even when he only like even few poems by him like would be kind of like a document of his epoch, which is still maybe a little bit like in the kind of like the repetition, or just like the I would say it's still like this like it means like the there's like a broader audience, like which is for me also like very often like the Russian-speaking audience, even if it's like Ukraine and if it's like Russia and the rest of the world. So, for example, I would read the translation of Brzezno Komedia in translation of Vasyl Lozynsky. So and then I would see there's like Lozynsky, and then like all these Russian books in my shelves, and like all this like world of like Russian classics, so which is like in translations also. So it was also what influenced me, like a kind of like a high school person. So I cannot tell it's not influencing me. So there is no like clear maybe line between like Russian and Ukrainian, but obviously like after the World War II and through all the censorship and like from Shevchenko obviously and Kutlarevsky not so much, but there are like some other like writers. Yeah. So modernists are very important. Yeah, Zero, as I told, like, and then George Krupi, for example, I have discovered like when I would read it again, and then I would know that some contemporary Ukrainian poets like Nazar Char would also refer to him, and he's like very linguistically futuristic and not like possible to translate even easy. So he would like do his own translations. But yeah, it's obviously how you like. I would say it's like the economy of the medium you're using. So basically, how you're using the like by translating only a few people that you can like bring over the context. So, but yeah, and that was not possible until maybe recently. But so for me, there were also like all the 18th generation of the 18th. I think like the sixth generation of six is kind of like a lost generation in Ukraine of the dissidents, like movement and so on. But yeah, I know maybe I'm not really an expert on that, but yeah, I think like the 80s were much more interesting, and yeah, obviously the 90s in Ukraine. So yeah, some of the other. Yeah, there are many names. So
Okay, as a little green alien, I will take Zero. I will take him to Maria Galina's planet.
Yep.
Questions to Ainsley, to Vasyl. Mitya, yes.
This question to Ainsley, I want to get back to this cohabitation, if you will, in one book of diary entries and poems. And when we read it as readers, obviously we read them differently. But when you read them as a translator, do poems appear kind of more tricky, or are they really the beast of the same nature?
Well, I can't answer that for poems and diary entries, like universally.
No,
right?
I mean,
but for
for
this particular book, I mean, both. So Maria Galina. So the actually, for those who have not read her work before, this cycle of Communiqués that we read from, and indeed several of the other poems that I read are actually not super characteristic of a lot of her earlier work, because she historically was a pretty traditional poet in terms of form. And some of the poems in this book reflect that. So they are written in rhyme and meter, in regular stanzas, and then some we read mostly ones that are written in free verse. So I would say that some of her poems that are written in free verse or are kind of like prose poems, like the one with the old man and the absent apple sellers, not a huge difference between translating that and translating one of her diary entries, because it's written in a very conversational language without those formal elements. But some of the other poems in the book present all of the familiar challenges to translating rhymed and metered poetry. Interestingly, the new book, Nineveh, is moving more and more in this direction of free verse. So that's something about her as a poet, maybe that happened in the war, because of the war, because of the Ukrainian contemporary poetry milieu. You know, there could be so many factors. But yeah, so both. I mean, so some of the poems are not stylist or formally that different from diary entries, I guess.
Could I say something?
Yeah.
Again, to the topic of the evening as poetry of today, and to some very subtle things that Masha does. I have to say that I'm kind of I don't know. I do have a crush on Maria Galina. Because again, she kind of lures you with seeming total, as I said, boredom and simplicity. And you like, it's like a horror movie, you know, the first 15 minutes of the horror movie. There is a boring house, there is a boring gazon, a boring dog, and you go there and then like, what the fuck, where I am? Because what she does in this poem that Ainsley translated and asked me to read, it's like it's a pale parody of Alexandrийские песни by Kuzmin, which again it's a very interesting choice of thing to play with, and then by the end it's Communiqués. It's the one use. And what would Kuzmin say of this combination? One can only wonder. Right? It's a very new poetry about the recent use, for which she uses a totally exquisite, precious thing of the past, and then she smashes it.
I would also add that the diary entries, especially as they have become, as they are now, are a literary genre for Maria Galina. I mean, like for many writers who keep diaries, this is often true. Like we've seen this before, but especially this public diary that is written every day. It has acquired its own kind of structure and rules and so on. I think this is slightly less true about the entries that are included in this book, because it was a genre in development. It wasn't something she had done in this kind of a regular way, and so it's kind of taking form, actually, which is something we didn't know when we were working on it, really. But I would say about it now that it is also not a kind of spontaneous post. Right.
It would be interesting to categorize the similarities and differences between the two genres, but I don't expect you to do it on the fly, on the spot.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rick. Just came here. A friend recommended. I know nothing about any of you. I'm totally enjoying this. And as one who just barely speaks California English, so I guess for both people, I would ask, in the context of, I've become very interested in some of the ways that, I had a period of time in a very conservative religious community. And so I've been especially interested in one of the things about the war and so on is my interest and my concerns about certain American groups being interested in religion in Russia and the Orthodox Church. Okay, so I have this very visceral concern about all that. So for the two of you, like, what brings you to, like, right now in contemporary terms, what is most important to you about your interest in this person and her journey from Moscow to Odessa, for example, and for you? Like, I'd be really interested. Like, what are you most concerned that you're faithful to in the work that you do?
Thank you, Rick. I think that, as I said earlier when Polina asked about the kind of genesis of this book, I think that, that there are so many people in Ukraine who are writing, and there are people who are not in Ukraine but yet are writing about Ukraine and what's been happening there, and people who left Russia and are writing about Ukraine and what's happening there. I think that for me, maybe it's not an accident that I said that Maria Galina is around the age of my mother, right? And this is someone who had a whole life in the Soviet Union, saw that empire collapse, made a new life in post-Soviet Russia, essentially saw that empire collapse in a way, right? And has maintained throughout all of that a point of view that I can only characterize as sober and good-natured, and with a sense of the tremendous ironies of life. And so I think that out of all of the many people whose work I am reading and following, and whose fates I am concerned with for their physical safety through all of this, I think that the voice of Maria Galina has been a real point of stability for me, even when she's talking about how many rockets fell on Odessa last night, but she's still saying, "Good morning, here I am, I have to go feed the cat." So that's my pitch, I guess, for Masha.
Yeah, the religious question is always like the question about the that's right, yeah. It's like how would I say, it should make me to believe into something. So if it's like not, it should be not real, but it shows some of the aspects of the reality, some of the like in a kaleidoscope of some like some particular maybe feelings and journalism is for me also like a source of knowledge. So I'm still like very like maybe Marxist in that terms of like the ideas of like what knowledge means to the people and what the revolution should be and so on. But I don't think right now it's anymore like up to date. So I would say that the translation has to make you believe. So it's like the opposite of it.
I actually have a poem. I thought one of the ones I was going to read, but it doesn't quite address your question about religion, but maybe it does a little bit.
It's not the question about religion.
It is a little bit, though. This is it's a funny poem, kind of, a little bit funny. And maybe Vasyl will read the Ukrainian because I actually don't have the Russian. If you want, in English, they say the sea has gotten so clean that the shoreline waters are once again populated with marbled crabs, seahorses, mermaids. Some putt says he saw a sea monk preaching good deeds and non-resistance, sitting on a yellow rock by the entrance to the Gulf. That's the poem.
Говорить, море очистилося настільки, що в прибережні води повернулися мармурові краби, морські гребінці, русалки. Один пот скаже, що бачив морського ченця, який проповідує добро і непротивлення, сидячи на жовтому камені біля входу до затоки. It's a usual word.
Yeah, I didn't recognize it either.
Yeah. Some people I don't know actually. I'm still like more on the
Oh yeah.
other side of the country.
I was thinking a lot. I really liked what you said, Vasyl, about how the poetry is behind what is happening in my life, and how like the poetry doesn't catch up with me. That was I've been thinking a lot about how different artistic projects are in a different timeline, or in different artistic imaginations work on a really different timeline, and it is so fascinating to have you two in the conversation in a way, because right here you have somebody who's responding every day to something, right, and finds a way to respond every day, and then for you might be really different. Your work seems to be on a really different timeline. And so, like, do you feel that the two art forms are in conversation with each other, or the two timelines intersect, or how, like, yeah.
Yeah. So earlier on, it was more common for me that I would write something. Would you describe the some events also, like more like literary, like in terms like more like a journalist or so? But like many other poets who were on Maidan, and they were also writing poems. But the thing is that I don't know that my poems are aiming to make the people think, not only like just to consume the information. So it's just my message to the reader.
Complexity requires time, or some complexity, the greater complexity. I don't know. There's a neat. I don't think there's a neat formula.
I'd say it's time for the conversation to become natural and chaotic. My favorite moment of some of our events when people
Неформальным общением.
переходим к неформальному общению. But before that, I want to say that this will be a very exciting spring event-wise. This will be very exciting spring event-wise at Globus, with some of my absolutely favorite people coming here to talk. For example, Ilya will talk about the poet he studied all his life, about Pasternak late in May. Yasha Klotz will come to speak about Sinyavsky and many other wonderful. Vanya Sokolov will talk about Kushnir. So also at Berkeley, in 2 weeks' time, we hope to host Vladimir Rafenko, one of the coolest and most complex voices of Ukrainian prose today, who moved from being a style of Russophone writing into writing only in Ukrainian at the moment. In April, we hope ЕБЖ, если будем живы, as Tolstoy always would end his sentences, that Andrukhovich comes to town, and we'll have that conversation. So there is something almost feverish, almost frenetic about these kinds of literature happening to us, around us. Well, at this point, we're nervous and unhappy enough to have that much of literature in our lives. We need poetry and books. Thank you, Globus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ainsley and Vasyl. Thank you.
Yeah, you still can ask your questions personally and send books with your favorite authors.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah, Polina asked me to.
Самое интересное, это вот
Как это посмотреть?
Сейчас Максим вернется, мы его спросим. Она пишет Берлин прочь. Какая машина?
Да, привет. Вы там приехали? А вы знакомы, нет? Аня, Илюша, Илья, я. Нашей лодки.
Я на самом деле не считал, что
Илюша посоедался. Я я пыталась
мы с Сашей, она повестка.
Мне кажется, где-то видели. Но я не знаю.
Такой малюсенький не нашли.
Майя на 3 часа Саша думала, что мы сейчас на месте уходим.
Много времени.
Не, ну мы в воде. А вы не выходите? Нет, мы потянулись. Мы были близки к переворачиванию. Ну да. Даже когда тянулся в карман, я там... Ну, мы были... Я выжила, я приехала в Америку с собой.
Можна на ти чи я пам'ятаю, минулого разу ми говорили, що ти месяць цими машинами, що робиться, так? Хто займається дронами in the area. Ми шукаємо людину, один гарний хлопчина з Києва, і він хоче закрутити, він бере на себе всю логістику і всі пошук грошей. Нам потрібен технічний інженер, який має відношення до дронів.
Я знайомий, який працював в нього, значить, його стартап чи компаундер з дронами. Але я досить давно з ним не спілкувався. То я можу...
А можна попитати?
Так, але мені треба... То ви можете, якщо ми з вами як вже обмінювали?
Це, що я давав, це я знаю, чи ми знайшлися. А буде він не дає? Будемо
Так, я просто... Автоматично. Але не півністю з українською, через Айва. Це було дуже давно.